So from embodied research, we're very much thinking about how to communicate as clearly and as evocatively as possible the experience. Sometimes some experiences are really hard to describe, but sometimes a picture will do it. Sometimes a poem will do it. Sometimes a dance will do it. And all of these can be relevant ways of communicating your research, believe it or not. So I'm destroying all the models that you think about research. And certainly, at the university that I'm engaged with at Bournemouth, there's a lot of emphasis on communicating from it. And thinking about how to carry that message across so that it can be understood and utilised by others. So, things like art, if it describes it can be helpful. Some people will say, is that that's not very academic, is it? And a colleague of mine at Bournemouth, Kip Jones, he does a lot of research using film. So he'll look at a phenomena and he will use art and film. So you will watch film. And he tells this great story of where he was at a conference presenting his work, and some haughty professor said, yes, Professor Jones, but where's the academy in all of this? And Kip just said, it's in the footnotes. So it's not that we're not kind of doing the rigorous study. It's not that we're not reading things at all. It's more about how we communicate it.
I have a client who has a very girly energy, and she only speaks to me through her poetry, which is very mature, very sad, and very beautiful. That's the only way she shows that other side of her, and she writes absolutely beautiful poetry.
I'm sitting here. I wonder if you can mix even. Are you allowed to mix some of them? Because when you said a client, I was also thinking of a client who also writes beautiful poetry. He just puts it into words that has no words. It's the same. He does it with art. Also, when we use art together, another way that he can express himself in just such a way that has no words.
I think that's wonderful, and it's I think in our field we can utilise all of that. Remember, I was telling you yesterday, I think, about that guy in this psychiatric unit where I said I ended up having to eat my hat a little bit, because he ended up having ECT. But I actually presented a paper on him based on the music that he and I shared, because it seemed to me that I was able to hear more from him through the music he was telling me about, and much of our communication was around him, telling me a piece of music, which I went back to my neighbour who was a music appreciation person, and borrowed the music and listened to it, really listened to it, and then I went back to him and I said, I listened to that Vaughan Williams, that piece on the name of it, on something Hill, Wenlock Hill, which is a very dark, deep piece of music. It's actually about suicide, about wishing to kind of take a leap. And I said I found really powerful. that was our communication, you know, amongst his dark deepness, and then he'd tell me about another piece. You know, and it was about him being able to describe his knowledge and understanding. But I learnt a lot from the music. So when I did a presentation of that, essentially I was trying to say that it was a piece on the art of listening, and that listening is not necessarily through a person's words, but through a multitude of other things. So what I did was, at the presentation, I played the music. I invited people to sit and listen, you know, because this was the music that was important to him. You know, that wasn't a major piece of research, but it was a way of communicating. Yeah. And one of the things we do in research is think very much about how we communicate our message. Yeah. How we begin to let others know about our experience. But if you think about it, that is the art of counselling and psychotherapy. We try in as many different ways as we can to really listen and hear what it is that someone is saying. So, you know, your client's pictures, you know, may be deeply symbolic and so on. And what you can't hear in words, you will hear in pictures or in poetry or whatever.
It was very interesting. One of my clients actually has a wallpaper with the pomegranate. Never realized it was a flower there. So she picked it up and she would stare, because she would sit in such a way that the wallpaper was facing her. And then after 4 or 5 sessions, we started talking about, have you noticed that you have this flower? I said, oh yeah, I didn't. And our whole process through that was about her growth, because to her it was symbolic as fertility. And she had really toxic parents, and she had a real issue always happening there. But she was very creative, she was an artist basically. And eventually, her growth was, she started a business. And can you imagine her business, the name of her business is Pomegranate?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. It was just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Because she became independent and, you know, all those things. And she's drawing and painting and doing the thing. So yeah.
But can you see, if you were to either use and you know, just kind of describe your work, you know, both the dark stuff as well as the successful stuff, you know, we begin to get a real sense of therapy at work, and you know, so. You know, another way of doing research is to do it, as a lot of research is done, through case studies. Yeah, so when we read case studies, we get a good sense of like how the therapy went. And case studies generally are a kind of it's a descriptive process, yeah. It's of your work. Yeah. And if it's written well, you can learn such a lot about it. You know, there are so many people who have been influenced by Yalom. You know, Yalom, if you like, it's an autoethnographic piece, yeah, you know, with ethical aspects already built into it. You know, hopefully nobody's identifiable in it. But who's been influenced by Yalom, and you know, I think the gift of therapy, and some of his work, Love's Executioner. You know, you kind of suddenly are able to go, phew, you know, it's okay to make mistakes, or phew, you know, it's okay to work outside the box a little bit. Yeah. But we get a good sense then of practice. Yeah. And Yalom doesn't mention neuroscience or anything anywhere, yeah, but we still learn a lot in terms of the art and science of psychotherapy. Yeah.
Can I share something? A client I'm still working with, so he has psychosis in the rehab, and
something like it hit him, and then he was there in the initial sessions. There was the major part of his psychosis which he was carrying, and there was a story, obviously. And in the end, he wanted to know, do you believe me? It was very important for him to, you believe me, right? I'm like, yeah, I do. And during that, in that phase, he shared with me the poetry that he wrote when he was 12. And it was mind-blowing. I mean, the overwhelm, I think I experienced at that time. You know, a part of him which is totally aware of what it was like and how to deliver it. It was beautifully written in Urdu and at the age of 12. And then I was like, why can I write it down? I had to take special permission from him because he doesn't write his poetry. It's all there in his mind, and he doesn't want to write it, he doesn't want to share it with anyone. And just the fact that I said, yes, I believe you. And till date, although that part of him, it's like a separate fragment, it exists, it's still there, and he's also aware that I don't want to go there, but that's a dreamer, that's a thinker, you know, that's not, you know, it's like, it's full of art. But obviously that is the one which also has a bit of psychosis in it. And I'm still struggling with how is it possible to have a balance of both? Is it possible? Can you have both of them together? But why I'm sharing it here is it was interesting to exist over there with him, to be there, you know, to actually be there, to really just get into that fantasies and all those characters. And only then, you know, what came out was amazing. It was mind-blowing, really. And I feel that was good. It was worth going there.
Yeah, great. You know, you're kind of naming something that's really important, and that is again our capacity to sit alongside, and really hear, you know, and really listened with a more poetic ear to the inner world, and indeed to our own inner world. You know, often with autoethnographic writing, like in Richard's case, you know, it's about having a good poetic ear to our own inner process. You know? I often
that's
read.
me actually becoming aware of a certain psychotic side of me. That was an experience where it was me actually becoming aware of a bit of psychosis that exists in me, a bit of narcissism that's there, and just becoming more aware of it. It's there. Yeah, it's there, I know.
There's something in the sharing of that with each other that feels really important, doesn't it? It's very real, our own vulnerability as practitioners. In fact, maybe this is a good time to. I think I'm kind of zipping along, I'm trying to respond to where you are. So I think maybe what I will do is I'll do the PowerPoint now, because it feels like we're in a place to really hear it. Yeah. Don't worry, I will be doing the guided imagery. Oops.
Spare.
Great. Yeah, that's great.
إضافي؟
It's doing it. Okay. So I thought we'd kind of take time to look at this thing called practice-based research. Yeah, sure. And so this is really taking us into the idea of being as therapist as researcher, yeah, rather than therapist who reads research. Yeah. And much of our work, as we noted, kind of comes from our practice base. But it's helpful to think about why on earth would we do that, and if we think about it, there are many ways as practitioners in which we sort of develop our practitioner knowledge, yeah, and these are the things that we're supposed to be very much engaged in, and these are just some of the things that I'd suggest we do. I don't know whether you'd have other things, but like in order to acquire more knowledge and to keep our practice kind of up to date or deeper, it seems to me that we can do our work through CPD, through continuing professional development. I think Anita talked about going off on a trauma workshop. We can do little bits of learning hither and thither. We deepen our practice by doing further training, in whatever might be of interest to us. And often, when we were talking about when we end up with one of those epistemic dichotomies, it's when we kind of maybe realise I need to be doing more on something. So, like people might think, I really need to do more work on the body. I think I'm going to go and do a bit more study. So we develop our knowledge through further training. We develop our practice through supervision. Yeah.
Jan, what is CPD?
Continuing professional development. So, whenever I come and do workshops, like the workshops like yesterday, they're a bit of a CPD. You hopefully do these little events that give you a bit of spark or something. Yeah. So the things that you were kind of sharing today were a result of your CPD. When you were beginning to notice what happened yesterday on the training. We probably gain some info from reading journals. Especially if they're interesting journals. Sometimes they're a bit dry, but we might develop our knowledge that way. Do you agree? We do it through reading. Sometimes not even, psychology or psychotherapy books. We might develop our work through poetry. So, we develop it through learning from the client. Yeah, in fact, that's probably one of our biggest learning places, isn't it? Is just through the feedback and working with clients. We do it in our peer groups, whether that's peer supervision and so on. Yeah, we do it through our own inner work, going on retreats. Maybe it's our spiritual practice that deepens our self-awareness and so on. Yeah. It also nourishes us, so maybe that allows us to, to be less tired. Yeah. It's that nurturing stuff for ourselves. And we do it through our own research. And observations. Can you think of other things? I'm just doing this because
sometimes I listen to, there's very good TED Talks I find that are done often based on research,
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
but that deal with all kinds of
Yeah.
topics that I find helpful. Sometimes. Like couple counseling, it's
Yeah.
do some of it, and I feel I definitely need to learn a lot more. And yeah, in the internet I find some very good, solid research-based information.
Right.
Even talks by the mystics, I find them very
Yeah.
interesting, especially
Oh,
Sadhguru
good. Yeah, I listen to him. I listen to him, it's very interesting.
and V.K. Shivani.
Yeah. So, huge fans.
He has a very different take on things sometimes. And it gives me a moment to pause and reflect, how is he looking at it in this way and how am I doing it? And there are times when I feel that it has really impacted on the way I have responded to circumstances in my life.
It's more like it sort of helps ponder inside. And the more you ponder, for me, the more I ponder inside, I feel I'm more accepting of what comes from the client. Somewhat. For me, this thing has been very amazing that the more I'm accepting of this person, the more I'm open to my client. And I've actually gone into a lot of spiritual and all these kind of readings and all. And I feel it's a good place to be. So, and then this place becomes more fluid. So I initially was here and I can feel that change, the more I'm going in, this place becomes more accepting and open. That feeling it's a really good feeling. I don't know how to explain that right now. It's more about this person, soul spirituality.
You probably heard me often kind of do that diagram, which is, like it's the famous one of, and we can include everything in it. So this is counsellor and client or whatever. It's the work that we do to notice what happens in the space between. And I guess, certainly in some of the research work that I have done around people and their spiritual practice, that one of the things that seems to happen is that somebody with a very grounded understanding of their spiritual practice, particularly one that develops an understanding of oneness. That we can sometimes notice that from their stories that practitioners can kind of really widen that space a little bit, in terms of, so it might be more like that. They have a greater sense of what's happening in the field, a deeper sensitivity. But what you're, so in other words, that our practice, reading about the mystics or whatever, that allows us to have a deeper understanding of this area, can be incredibly helpful in the psychotherapy.
We're not going into the client's
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but also the client comes into our world. It's that's part of it, and it's that bit around being able to discern, what's in the field, having a greater sense of both my inner world and what's going on here. It's kind of like if I'm so concerned internally with what to think of next, my world goes like that. And but just being able to stay with that quality of presence.
The Therao part.
Yes, exactly.
At the drama workshop that Anita was at, I also went, and it was I think I realized a few things, like over the last few weeks. I think there was that sense of it was getting too much, and I think that I did this guided meditation thing, and I realized how unsafe I felt in my body. you know, and how everything felt like, so because I was withdrawing from my friends, I was withdrawing from social situations where it felt like engaging with people at a deeper level felt like an attack on me.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting how that was kind of creeping into my work as well. And then there was that whole thing of like, okay, well, imagine your safe place. And the one thing that I had in my safe place was awe, right? That feeling of just being blown away, because it was very like, it had to do with nature and this like situation or this place from my childhood, and how I was just in awe of it, and I was just looking at it like I wanted to be part of it, and so, and then I realized, okay, well, my safe place, and it has awe, and then also in my therapy sessions with my clients, a lot of time that's what I bring in. It's being in awe of them, being in awe of what and they're bringing and who they are. And I realized, okay, wait, so really the safety that I'm creating is an extension of the safety that I feel within me. And so that was really just, it was a really interesting realization, because when I stopped feeling safe, it became, I couldn't access that place anymore so much. And putting it out there and creating that space was becoming more and more of a problem.
So what did that kind of enable you to do to kind of either change your practice, or, I mean, what did that show you?
I'm still sitting on it for now. Right? I think just because I hadn't actually even identified that I was feeling unsafe, and somehow even identifying it brought with it a sense of peace. And you know, like with the whole guided meditation, being in a place, it was like it created the safety for me to actually sit with the lack of it. And that was liberating in its own way, just kind of like giving it a nod, like, okay, well,
It was named.
It was named, right? Like, okay, you exist. All right. Yeah. So if it comes into the room, I'm just more aware of it, or I know when to take a step back, as opposed to just being frustrated with what is happening. When is this going to be done? Yeah.
I mean, I guess all of these things hopefully potentially allow us to come into that place of a quality of self-reflection, or maybe they create little aha moments, which may or may not result in any action, but I think there's something really important in the name that becomes really important. I'm going to present here. This, I think I might have shown you this in another context, but I feel this is incredibly helpful in terms of the work in the field. You see that? And this is where, like, there's different perspectives on therapy. And we can look at it as where therapy is seen as a drug, as a treatment that comes in to effect some kind of change. Or we can see therapy more as a dialogue. And this is a fundamentally important kind of diagram in relation to exploring. Remember what we were talking about? What's the outcome of your work? What is therapy about? And I think this is really helpful. When we see therapy as a drug, right, or as a treatment, we can see it as like, well, it is a bit like, it's a simple system where we see, you know, the world as, you know, like if something goes wrong, you just need to kind of fix it and, you know, change the part, change the thought pattern, and all will be well. Yeah. When we work from a more dialogical perspective, we begin to potentially say, well, that's kind of okay, but life isn't like that. Yeah? Just kind of either giving a special treatment protocol to one person won't necessarily mean it will have the same impact on another person. Why? Well, because in another worldview, the world is a rather complex adaptive system. What that means is that, like, we're all individuals and our lives intersect with each other in a myriad of different ways. So one model cannot fit everybody. Yeah. So, you know, when you have kinds of treatment protocols, particularly in more medically orientated therapeutic environments, it says what you need to do is do the 6-week course where you will do this, this and this, and at the end of it we'll test you and hopefully you'll have changed. Yeah. And that happens, that is one way of thinking about therapy. Yeah. But when, you know, if we focus more on a dialogical, relational model, we say, well, that isn't necessarily quite how it is. Yeah. And I have clients who will kind of go on things and eventually they'll come back. You know, or we have a system in the UK where, like, people can get therapy on the state, you know, with the medical system, but it's 6 weeks and it's a protocol. Yeah. And so we end up with this notion of, like, I had one client who came to me to say who had severe social anxiety. You know, she found it very difficult to be amongst a crowd or in groups and so on. So she said it was a joke. This woman was a pharmacist, a very bright woman, and she said, I've come because it was a joke what they offered me. I went in and I had my initial assessment, and they said I had social anxiety, so they put me in a group. Because that's the protocol. Yeah. And you know, but can you see, like that protocol of, like, come and do this thing, go into a group, like, might work for some people. It's not to say that it doesn't, you know, but we're not a simple system. Yeah. The world isn't about kind of do this and you will get better. So that's where we can end up with a bit of a dilemma when it comes to research. Yeah? A research that says, you know, this protocol can be effective, you know, like, might be helpful, but does it tell the complete story of the person? Yeah. Does it tell the complete story? If we work from a dialogical perspective. When we use therapy as a drug, we say that, you know, it's general to all individuals. So I have my protocol that I will use with you. It can often happen with certain forms of CBT. Yeah, but, like, we'll go through this 6-week program together, and I will use that. That's interesting when some of you have been talking around, but what do you do when a client says, I don't want to do that? Or when a client says, can I share my poetry with you? Yeah. Your protocol says no, so you don't do it. Yeah. Whereas from a dialogical perspective, we say that our therapy responds to each individual. Yeah. As opposed to, you know, so it's client, really is client-centered, individually orientated, as opposed to the therapist determining the treatment.
Almost like a one size fits all.
Yeah, that would be it. Or, you know, what I could, or we could also say, and this links a little bit to the therapist-led stuff, is that as therapists, I don't have to think about anything then, do I?
Yeah, actually there's some clients who, if they've been recommended by another friend, and the friend says, well, we did this and it worked for me, like a CBT or something. And when they come in and they're like, they get more anxious, like, I want this, and if I'm doing this, why isn't this working for me? So it can have a negative impact if they think there's such cookie cutter kind of system.
Yeah.
And when I was reading this therapy as a drug, something came to my mind because I was watching CNN in the morning, and they were discussing Trump's latest comment on a journalist's assassination. I will call it assassination or whatever. The collective numbing of one section of society which is okay with anything that is going on and not impacting them directly. It's as if, as long as it doesn't impact me directly, I'm not going to take any responsibility for it. Whether it's a refugee crisis or it's humanitarian aid, what is happening in Yemen, Syrian refugees or Rohingyas, Kashmiris, or just one individual being murdered. He was an American citizen. It was horrifying to hear him say that I have to sell arms to the Saudis. If I don't, the Russians and the Chinese will. So it's very strange when you can numb the conscience of the entire, a section of society or even the entire nation.
There's a lot to kind of ponder in that, isn't there, around, you know, what's happening there. I mean, to, you know, the politics that is so disgusting.
But they are a very liberal, open-minded, dialogue-based nation. I mean, that's what is projected.
Is that so?
And
Is
then
that so?
I was going to say
Yes.
that.
The optics are there, you know, I mean,
The facade.
and even the experience of many people who've gone there have grown as individuals successfully. They have been given that space. You hear a lot of life stories, people going to America and becoming rich and famous and successful as artists, as writers, as filmmakers, whereas in their own countries they didn't have that opportunity. So in a land where there is so much opportunity and there is such a rich culture of being open-minded about listening to inventions and creativity, and you come up with a leader who's like Trump, elected by the people. It's giving such a mixed message to me. And you know, all that dialogue and all that openness.
But there's the other aspect of the reserves of the natural Americans over there, there are two sides of it, and then of course there's the arms and ammunition, whether the terrorists use it or the army uses it, and the economic comes in, so there's a facade of goody, but the actual facts of life are very
Money talks.
drugs and
Business, it's all
alcohol
about business.
and debauchery and places like everything that one can think of. So the reality of the economics is that, and then the facade is
But it's not just a facade, I think there's a big disparity of the mindset, right? That you have the East and the West and the East liberals, then you have the mid-states who have a very different thought process.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? And I was just thinking that, like, one of the ways in which we maybe begin to work with stuff like this is also just communicate our experiences. It was funny, yesterday a neighbour contacted me. We were doing various bits and pieces, and I had to text him to say that I couldn't do it because I was here in Pakistan. And his text to me was like, oh, how is that? I hear things are really bad for women there. And so, and so, oh, I actually reading my text back to him, I can't remember what it is. No, it's here. But and that's a perspective, yeah.
Eastern societies are supposed to be the closed, the conservative, the backward societies. And the Western societies are supposed to be the liberal, the
But
open-minded.
they're not, and the
But
law of America
look at
is not
the-
liberal at all.
In reality,
I don't think I've got it on the pad
What?
here, but it's on my phone. But I just said, well, don't kind of believe everything. I said, yes, sure, there are certain difficulties here for women, around domestic violence and things. But I said to him, but in the West, we need a Me Too campaign.
yes.
Like it's, I wanted to throw it back, we have porn, women objectified in the most appalling ways,
Children.
so it's like, but it's that thing where like we hear things and we don't necessarily, or we become blind to experience it, we need to kind of hear it. The whole thing around the Me Too campaign has really brought kind of hidden sexual violence and things to women in the West. There is all of that, but there's an awful lot of it.
But there's a lot of Me Too campaign that has come here as
Yeah.
well. And it's amazing because I've had a lot of clients, a number of them come out
Yeah.
affected by it, and a young client who wasn't, really assaulted as such, but it was quite alarming because she's 16 years old and she was saying how everybody's gone through some touching or something by some staff or servant or tailor. And she was talking about her friend and it wasn't even a big deal.
Yeah.
So when you talk about desensitization,
Yeah.
she was so like, well, that's a common practice.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there are people who have come up, young
Yes.
people
Yeah, that's what
who
I'm
have
saying.
come up with, building pages where they have talked about all this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
bringing it up at the same time.
I have a question over there. They bring themselves and then sometimes you need to go down and read those comments. And they're also making themselves very vulnerable to a lot of crap people are talking about them. So they're emotionally stable to put it out there. And then people's comments, social media has got horrendous comments about those
But
women.
at the same
Yeah.
time, that the issues have been addressed also.
Yeah. I'm not
No,
saying
it's very
that,
good.
but
I'm saying there was a good thing, but what was alarming is that there were some people in their, 16 years old,
Yes.
and they were so desensitized. That was the alarming thing for me.
Yeah, sometimes I imagine like society, I think it's a bit overlapping, like the shadow of the society, the persona of the society, and all the archetypes and the defenses and the resistance kind of playing out. And if you look at even one of these forums, it's like the whole thing is there, right? Like with the repression of like, yeah, it's like, it's not a big deal, that dissociation that's coming out, but the shadow is still very much there, right? The different people who are commenting on it, and it makes me very curious about how we also function as a society and how the persona, the shadow of the society then affect our own different parts.
There's a good research project.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, let's kind of keep going with this because it's wonderful what you're kind of saying is like, how do we give voice to those voices, if you like, and I think we can really begin to do that. Why don't I just go through this and then shall we have a tea break? Just to. But I think it's just helpful when we think about, in terms of our work as therapists, like what we'll begin to know is that more qualitative research methods kind of rest in this column, and the more quantitative ones belong to the left-hand column. So in therapy as a drug, we say that it's all about your therapist skills that's important and your operations, like how skillfully you're able to do a mindfulness moment with your client, how you're able to do a protocol with a client that becomes the important aspect of the work. And on a more dialogical model, we suggest that actually it's the quality of the therapist's presence that is one of the most important factors in the work. So it's not about how good you can pull out a little technique and so on, but it's the quality of your presence that is an important factor. This is, if we follow through all of these things. It suggests that a standardized, manualized approach is helpful, and you can certainly do a research on a standard manualized approach, because you can say this is the approach and this was the result of it. What we say in a more dialogical way is that actually, it's more about our unique professional judgments, that's based on relationship that becomes important. So it's the idea. It's not so much about the kind of the skilled practice of what the manual says, but more about my in-practice judgment. And I'll be talking about that in a little while, about a more humanized approach. Yeah, it's that classic thing of I'm sure I've told you the joke about the skilled engineer who is a really good old skilled engineer, an old boy who does the check on the ship before it goes sailing to sea. And the ship, when it's sort of in the ocean, suddenly develops a problem. And this guy who is a really skilled engineer gets helicoptered out to the ship, and he spends about half an hour just walking around and listening to the pipes. And then after about half an hour, he kind of says to the guy, "Can you get my wrench?" So he gets a wrench, and he goes, bang! And then the ship's engines start up, and the captain is so pleased with it. And he said, "Send me a bill." So the skilled engineer sends him the bill and says, and charges him £50,000 for getting the ship going. And the captain says, "But that's ridiculous. You just kind of, used a wrench to bang the pipe. You give me an itemised invoice for your work." And he said, "For use of the wrench, 1 penny. For knowing exactly where to bang the pipe, £49,999.99. Yeah, so that, that's the thing. Yeah, that would be your skilled professional judgment. In the therapy as drug model, it suggests that there are universal truths. Yeah, which the universal truth would be people with PTSD are like this. Yeah, what people like Richard say is that it's a local truth. It's my experience that becomes important. Therapy as a drug values interventions. As dialogue, we say it's conversation and self-healing. It's not my intervention that does it. It's the nurturing of the other and the self-healing process. In the therapy as drug, it's therapist-led. In therapy as dialogue, it's client-led.
It's like a humanistic
Right thinking.
Yeah, there is something that's very, you know, that is very humanistic around this.
I think relation